All right, so let's get right into it. This fighter jet footage that surfaced online a few days ago on December 26th. It's got everyone talking because some analysts think it might show China revealing not one, but maybe even TWO 6th-gen fighter jets.
Yeah, if that's the case, it's a pretty big deal for sure. It really adds to that global race for, who's going to be top dog when it comes to 6th gen fighters.
For sure. We already have the UK, Italy, and Japan working together on that Tempest project. And then there's
Yeah.
France, Germany, and Spain who have that future combat air system thing going on. But this from China seems like it caught a lot of folks by surprise.
Yeah, it really shows that China is serious about this and they're moving quickly. If these jets are actually 6th gen, well, it could mean a big change in, who controls the skies.
So for people listening who maybe haven't been following this too closely, what makes a 6th-gen fighter so different from, the jets we've seen before?
It's kind of a bunch of things all coming together, to make something completely new in terms of air power. You got to think beyond just stealth. I mean, yeah, being hard to see on radar is still really important. But 6th gen fighters are way more than that. We're talking like AI systems that are super smart, almost like a co-pilot helping the pilot analyze tons of data and make decisions in real time. And then there's that ability to share data between all the aircraft so they can operate as a network, like a swarm coordinating attacks and sharing intel across the battlefield.
So it's like the jet itself is part of a bigger network. That's wild. What kind of tech makes all of that even possible?
One of the really cool things is what they call active flow control. Basically, imagine if you could control the air flowing around the plane to make it move, instead of using those old school moving parts like ailerons and rudders and flaps. All those things show up big time on radar.
So if you get rid of the moving parts and smooth out the shape of the plane, it's practically invisible to radar. That's a huge change for stealth tech.
Exactly. And then you add in those advancements they're making with materials and radar absorbent coatings, and you've got a plane that's super hard to detect.
Okay, so advanced stealth, AI-powered systems, and this whole networked warfare thing. What else makes these 6th-gen fighters so revolutionary?
Well, there's that potential for directed energy weapons. I think like really powerful lasers that could shoot down enemy missiles or even other planes. And then there's this idea of a smart skin for the plane, basically embedded with sensors that give the pilot a 360-degree view of what's happening around them. And don't forget about the potential for hypersonic speeds using new engine tech like scramjets and ramjets.
Hypersonic speeds. Now, that's some sci-fi stuff.
I know, right? But it's actually something that a lot of countries, including China, are really working towards. If you can get a fighter jet going that fast, it gives you a huge advantage in terms of, being able to outmaneuver other planes and strike really quickly.
All of this is super impressive. But it makes you wonder how the U.S. is doing in this race to build these 6th-gen jets. We've heard about their Next Generation Air Dominance Program, the NGAD, but they've been pretty quiet about the specifics.
True. The U.S. Air Force has kept NGAD under wraps, but we do know that a prototype part of the program actually flew secretly back in 2020. But it seems like costs and maybe some rethinking of the strategy have slowed things down a bit.
So is it possible that the U.S. is falling behind in this race?
It's tough to say for sure right now, but it's definitely possible. It's interesting because the U.S. seems to be really focused on stealth tech. But what we're seeing from China in this footage suggests they might be taking a more balanced approach.
What do you mean by balanced?
Well, some people think that China might be putting more emphasis on speed and how much the jet can carry, even if it means they have to give up a little bit of stealth capability.
So they might be okay with a jet that's a little easier to see on radar if it means it can fly faster and carry more weapons. Why would they make that trade-off?
Well, there could be a few reasons. Maybe China's military strategy is more about being offensive and being able to strike quickly instead of focusing on defense and stealth. It could also be because of the specific geopolitical situation they're in. Maybe they're not as worried about operating in really contested airspace and more concerned with projecting their power in their own region.
That's a really interesting point. It seems like there's no single right answer when it comes to designing these 6th-gen fighters. Each country is going to build what works best for them based on their own needs and their own strategic goals.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole 6th-gen fighter race so interesting to watch. It's not just about the technology, but it also tells you something about each country's military thinking and their overall goals in the world.
All right, so let's get back to that footage that started this whole conversation. We know China is working hard on developing 6th-gen fighters. We talked about the tech that makes them so special. But looking at these videos, can we actually say for sure that these are definitely 6th-gen designs? Or are we maybe getting a little carried away?
We do have to be careful about jumping to conclusions based on some footage. We haven't been able to independently verify what these aircraft can really do. And it's always possible that what we're seeing is, meant to mislead us, or maybe it's not as advanced as it looks at first glance.
So what are we seeing in this footage that's making people think these could be sixth-gen designs?
One thing that really stands out is that both of these aircraft don't have tails. That suggests they've got some really sophisticated aerodynamics going on, and maybe they're using that active flow control tech we talked about earlier.
So no tail could actually be a sign that they're using this active flow control to fly the plane.
It's a strong possibility, yeah. It's also worth pointing out that both planes seem to have a blended wing body design, which can make them harder to spot on radar.
And what about the engines? We talked about hypersonic speeds earlier. Is there anything in the footage that makes you think these jets could go that fast?
Well, the bigger of the two jets seems to have 3 engines. Some people are saying that could mean it's designed to fly at supersonic speeds all the time, or even hit those hypersonic speeds we were talking about.
So having 3 engines would give it that extra boost. It needs to go super fast. That makes sense. Anything else jumping out at you from the footage?
It's hard to tell for sure because the video is a little blurry, but it does look like both jets have their weapons stored inside, which is another sign of a really advanced stealth fighter. And they both seem to have a pretty small radar cross-section, meaning they're built to be hard to see on radar.
So even if we can't say for sure that these are sixth-gen fighters, it seems like there's enough there to say that China's making some serious progress in building some super advanced aircraft.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the main takeaway here. Whether or not these specific jets check all the boxes for being 6th gen, they show that China is serious about pushing the limits of what's possible with aircraft technology and challenging the U.S.'s dominance in this area.
Okay, so China may have just shown off 2 new fighter jets with some pretty interesting features. We've covered the key technologies that make up a 6th-gen fighter and compared how the U.S. and China are approaching development. But what about the rest of the world? What's been the reaction to this potential reveal?
It's been a mix of, amazement, a little bit of worry, and maybe some healthy skepticism. Some analysts have been praising China for their willingness to try new things and for how advanced these jets seem to be. But others are saying, let's not get too excited just yet based on some limited footage.
Now, it's a good idea to be careful when trying to figure out how good new military tech is, especially when we're relying on unofficial sources. But even if we're cautious about it, this whole thing has definitely got people talking all over the world.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For example, the Pentagon hasn't said anything officially about these Chinese flight tests. And some people are reading that silence as a sign that they're actually pretty concerned and taking this whole thing a lot more seriously than they're letting on publicly.
It really makes you think about how this potential shift in who has the most powerful air force could change things on the world stage.
Definitely. It's something that governments and military leaders all over the world are going to have to think about for a long time to come.
Well, we definitely have a lot to think about here. China potentially entering the 6th-gen fighter game brings up some big questions about the future of air power and how the balance of power might shift around the world. And I think it's safe to say that this story's not over yet.
No doubt about it. It's a big moment. And, it really makes you think about not just the jets themselves, but all the tech that goes into making these 6th-gen fighters so powerful.
Right, because as cool as those jets look, it's what's inside that really matters. We talked a bit about AI earlier. I'm curious to dig a little deeper there. You mentioned AI being like a super smart co-pilot for the pilot. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. Think about it like having this virtual wingman, right? It can analyze all this data from all these different sensors, radar systems, even other aircraft, and it can do it all super fast in real time. So this AI assistant, it can help the pilot see threats, figure out which targets are most important, even suggest the best way to fly or fight. It's almost like having a second brain in the cockpit, helping the pilot understand what's going on and make better decisions.
It's amazing. But it also makes me wonder, are there any risks to relying so much on AI, especially in something as intense as air combat?
That's a good question. One of the big concerns with AI is that it can be tricked by what we call spoofing. It's like fooling the AI into thinking something's there when it's not, or making it misinterpret what it's seeing. For instance, an enemy could use electronic warfare to create fake radar signals or mess with communications, which could confuse the AI and lead to bad decisions.
So it's like setting up a fake target to distract the AI from the real threat.
Exactly. And that's not the only problem. AI systems also have trouble when they encounter something completely new, something they've never seen before. We call these out-of-distribution scenarios. Let's say a sixth-gen fighter comes across a brand new type of aircraft or weapon, something it wasn't trained on. The AI might not be able to analyze that new data fast enough or accurately, and that could put the pilot at a disadvantage.
So it sounds like there's still a lot of work to do to make these AI systems tougher, more reliable, so they don't fall for those tricks.
Absolutely. That's a huge area of research and development all over the world right now. One way to do it is to train the AI on way more data, lots of different scenarios. Another way is to develop AI that can learn and adapt as it goes, learn from new experiences in real time.
Sounds like a pretty fascinating and complex field. It seems like AI is going to be a game changer for air warfare in the future.
No doubt about it. And it's not just about AI on its own either. It's about how AI works together with other new tech, like those directed energy weapons and hypersonic engines we were talking about.
Speaking of hypersonics, let's go back to those Chinese jets for a second. You said that the bigger jet having 3 engines could mean it's designed for hypersonic flight. How does that work exactly?
Well, to hit those hypersonic speeds, which is anything above Mach 5 or 5 times the speed of sound, you need insanely powerful engines. One way to do that is with something called a scramjet engine.
Scramjet, yeah, I've heard of that, but I'm not really sure how it works.
It's a little technical, but basically a scramjet is a type of jet engine that breathes air and works best at supersonic speeds. So unlike regular jet engines, which have to compress the air before they burn the fuel, a scramjet uses the speed of the plane itself to compress the air.
So the faster the plane goes, the better the scramjet works.
Exactly. That's why scramjets are perfect for hypersonic flight. But there are some big challenges with scramjet tech, too. They need very specific conditions to work right, and they get incredibly hot, which means you need special materials and cooling systems.
So it's a really promising technology with a lot of potential, but it's not easy to get it right.
That's a good way to put it. And even if China has actually built a working scramjet engine for this new fighter, it's probably going to be really expensive and complicated to use.
So it's not just about having the tech, but also being able to build it and maintain it on a large scale.
Exactly. And that's something that both China and the US are going to have to think about as they keep developing these next generation fighters.
It seems like we're moving into a whole new era of air warfare, where the technology is changing faster than ever. And it's not just about who has the fastest plane or the stealthiest plane anymore. It's about who can combine all these new technologies in the best way and who can adapt to the changing nature of combat.
You're right. That's a really important point. It shows how important it is to think strategically and plan for the long term when it comes to military development. You can't just react to whatever the newest tech is. You have to think ahead and have a vision for how you want to fight wars in the future, decades from now.
It's a lot to think about, but the stakes are high. The decisions that are made today are going to shape the balance of power around the world for years to come.
Yeah, it's a really complicated situation, and it's changing all the time. And it's not just about countries anymore. Now you have all these private companies getting involved in making this high-tech stuff.
That's true. It's getting harder to tell where the government ends and the private sector begins when it comes to military tech. What do you think that means for the future?
Well, it could be good or bad. I
Yeah.
mean, it could lead to faster innovation, more companies competing with each other, which could bring prices down and speed things up. But it also makes you wonder who's really in control and what if this powerful tech ends up in the wrong hands.
It's something to think about for sure. But let's get back to those 6th-gen fighters. How do you think you're going to change the way wars are fought?
I think we're going to move away from those big battles with lots of planes and tanks, like we used to see. Instead, we'll probably see a more spread out kind of warfare where everything's connected. Those 6th-gen fighters with their fancy sensors, AI, and long-range weapons, they'll be like key players in this huge connected battle space.
So instead of those big dogfights you see in movies, future air battles might be fought by swarms of drones and unmanned aircraft, all controlled by a few 6th-gen fighters acting as like the brains of the operation.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And that makes you think, what's the role of the pilot going to be in all this? Will they be more like generals, directing the battle from far away? Or will they still need to be in the cockpit making those split-second decisions that only a human can make?
I have a hard time imagining a future where there are no human pilots at all, but it seems like their job is going to change a lot.
For sure. And one of the big challenges for militaries is going to be how to train these pilots for this new way of fighting.
That's a good point. It's not just about the tech, it's about changing how you train and coming up with new strategies to use all this new stuff effectively.
You got it. And it's not just the pilots either. You got to train everyone who supports them, the maintenance crews, the intelligence analysts. Everybody needs to be ready to work in this new high-tech networked environment.
It's a lot to figure out, but I think one thing's for sure, the way we fight wars in the air is going to look a lot different in the future. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out on the world stage.
Absolutely. It really shows how fast technology is changing and how that change is affecting everything, even war.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.
Happy to do it. And I hope everyone listening found this whole discussion about 6th-gen fighters and what they mean for the future as interesting as we did.
I'm sure they did. And for everyone out there listening, keep your eyes on the skies because the future of air power is happening right now.